son. So right about the time, somewhere between about like 18 and 23 years old, 17, he disappeared off everybody's radar for a while. Then
They just showed back up one
he just showed back up, started writing awesome plays, and
Oh, sorry guys, I was short.
he was kind of the money guy as far as the plays go. He was, when I say that, he was the guaranteed box office smash.
He was the Spielberg.
He was the Spielberg of the writers. Very popular, but he was a loose cannon. He was often, he did spend some small stints in jail for brawling, and he roomed with Thomas Kidd for a while, but Kidd had to kick him out because of his violent temper. The fact that he was constantly threatened, and in fact, at the age of 29, he died in a bar brawl. Some say it was intentionally provoked, but it was over who's going to pay the bill, and he got stabbed in the eye socket with a very large knife.
That seems like a bit of an escalation.
With a knife?
With a knife. So, unfortunately, at the age of 29, he was gone. And he left behind a series of some pretty spectacular works. As I mentioned, he was the innovator of blank verse. He was known for taking bits of history and sort of telescoping them into a drama, meaning really focusing it into a dramatic event. His Tamburlaine 1 and 2, well, 1 was so popular that there was a clamor for 2. Part of what made it so popular was the fact that one of the leading actors, named Edward Allen, aka Ned, was the one to bring this to life, and him and Richard Burbage are sort of the two like superstars of the acting world. But he also portrayed Faustus when it was written. You see the date there is 1588. Faustus, I'll tell you a little bit about the backstory of that, is based on the legend of a Dr. Johann Faust who attended Heidelberg University and had a play, or had a book written about him called The Lamentable Life and Deserved Death of Dr. Johann Faustus. What made this guy so suspect is that he was he had a degree in divinities, so he was studying the religious nature, but he was a practicer of necromancy.
Yo!
What is that? Raising the dead. It is basically magic of the unknown world, trying to manipulate it. And if you know anything about the New Testament at all, there's a fellow named Simon Magus, who was one of the apostles, one of the like obscure apostles or something, but had then turned towards magic and was condemned to death thereafter. The nature of the Faustus story, as you will read, has been replayed and replayed and replayed throughout the last 500 years of English language literature. The basic premise is, what would you be willing to receive to sell your soul? Okay? So this is based on an actual person who was a disreputable astronomer. How far the story goes is there's some question. But it's all based in the fact that there is his connection to magic in the unexplained world. So that's one of the things that you'll see in Dr. Faustus, is how well Christopher Marlowe takes this. Okay? I'll be honest, Faustus is dense. It will take you some care in reading it. For those of you that have trouble interpreting what you read in Everyman, I would definitely suggest that you find a synopsis online of Dr. Faustus. There are dozens of them available, so that you can know what's going on from scene to scene. There's some very sharp differences from scene to scene, which we'll discuss some. But some of his others included Edward II, Massacre in Paris, the Jew of Malta, which anti-Semitism, when we get to Merchant of Venice, was quite rampant in English society, and the behaviors of this lead character, Barabbas, are pretty appalling. But it's an excellently written play.
Oh, my God.
In the interest of time, I'm going to gloss over Shakespeare and come back to him later.
Makes sense.
I'll get to all that. So, the nature of how the theaters developed there were playhouses that were built and approved under the Master of the Revels. So this is somebody that Elizabeth appointed to basically run and oversee the theaters. But because there was still this stigma attached to them, they could not be located inside of the city limits, the city of London. They had to be located outside the city limits. I'll show you that in a second. But these are really the first permanent structures that are built specifically to be performance venues. Most of the rest of the time, if there was like, a town hall or a church sort of space, it would be modified from something else. But these are very specifically with a stage, with a backstage area, and usually a circular encompassing for various levels of seating. The wealthiest would be at the top. The groundlings that would pay a penny to see a play would be standing in the pit in the base. Occasionally, the scientific knowledge had grown to the point where people realized that high concentrations of people did spread the plague. So if the plague was outbreaking, the theaters would be shut down, at which time the theater companies would then take their shows out into the provinces to try and make their money.
Were these playhouses, were they the only form of, congregation for the sake of entertainment at that time? Or
Yeah, pretty much.
Really the only one?
Well, I mean, there would be maybe like a ballroom where you would have dances or what was called masks, which were sort of like staged dances, almost like a murder mystery, where the participants are part of what's going on, even though there's not a murder per se.
Would something like that be allowed in the city?
Those were generally of the court, so yes.
Okay.
Every afternoon when a performance happened, it would be announced by flags being raised on the pole of the theater. And these were flags that could be seen from quite a ways away, so that people, say even on the other side of the Thames River or whatever, could know that there were plays happening that day and make their way over to the theater. And trumpets would announce the sort of time intervals of 1 hour to curtain, 3 minutes to curtain, etc. Because there were no lighting systems, they were all part of these all took place in the late afternoon. Now this encouraged people to skirt their employment responsibilities, play hooky, and go see a play. Again, this is the devil's behavior. This encourages people to engage in sloth, frivolities, and therefore there were frequently Puritans, the founders of this country, Puritans, protesting the existence of these plays. Often harping, I've been to enough concerts in my day where there's, When I first saw Metallica and Ozzy Osbourne in 1986,
Whoa, whoa.
What
there
was
was
Tom?
half a mile of Christian protesters outside of the Cow Palace. Half a mile.
The music? It's sure music.
It was the devil's music. It was.
If you play it backwards, he's calling on Satan.
I know you had to state 1986 as if that made him seem less
Here is an outline of where the proper city of London was originally located. These red dots are where the theaters are located. Notice especially how many of them are on the south side of the Thames River. So there was a single bridge built across here with a high concentration of these theaters. Now, as I said, there weren't many copyright. The cockpit, the Whitehall,
There's the George.
That's like Red Bull.
the bull,
You guys made that?
not the Red Bull, the bull. As I said, there's no copyright elements in these days, so companies would often pay the playwright a flat fee. Give me a play, £6, £10, whatever it is. Okay? At that point, anybody in the audience could then sort of pirate that story and take it to another play. So once the play was performed and authorized once, they pretty much had no control over it. And these players were oftentimes stealing each other's and plagiarizing each other's works and so forth. A company would be somebody that was licensed by the Master of the Revels through Queen Elizabeth, and usually identified Her Majesty's men, Lord Chamberlain's men. They were identified with a